What is up, podheads? Back with another episode of the Podioslave podcast. My name is Tony. I'm joined by Anthony. We're both phenomenal. It's been a whirlwind January for us, and man, I'm really stoked that, as I always say every week, that we get to do this. But I'm happy about this episode, which is going to be 2 in particular, because it was, as we're getting closer to Super Bowl time, it was your Super Bowl.
Oh, I love that. It was my Super Bowl. Yeah, man. I think I say this in the episode with Alex, like this is like one of the final boss interviews. Mm-hmm. And I know that we have a ton of them, but it's in terms of like achievable guests that like Dave Grohl, he ain't coming on this. Zach from Rage, he's not coming on this. You know, it's a lot of these legacy guys, you know, but as far as attainable guests, this was right up there. And if you've listened to the podcast, you know, Prime Mysterio, arguably my favorite band of all time, and certainly of what I call mine, like my era. We existed at this very same time, similar age. I grew when they grew. I was trying to think, Tony, and you have a better memory than me. We chatted about Prime Mysterio on the Lyrics episode, on the He's on Fire 3-album run. I think I gave Explosives.
Stateside
and Is Dead. And you could probably continue that. And then we talked about him at year-end episode in 2023. I think we've talked about seeing them. Actually, Concert Impossible. I think I talked about the West Coast trip I went to go see them. I think. I can't remember.
And I mean, you've seen them over the course of time too, a decent amount. And over the course of the life of the podcast, we've talked about them just in passing because they are one of your favorite bands. And you know, by proxy, got me into them, got Nate into them, and being able to kind of share in that. Again, your Super Bowl the other night, talking to Alex for 2.5 hours was awesome, man. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, it's funny. We've been doing this podcast for 4 years. You've been nudging me like we could probably get one of those guys, and I held off. Because you know, they say don't meet your heroes. Like it was one of those things where they're a cryptic band. They are. They have that Long Island cryptic sauce, you know, that's in the blood in the water there. So I didn't know where they were at as a band, if they'd even want to talk, you know, not necessarily with us, but just in general. And would the conversation suck? And, you know, you never know. And I know we've said that about a few guests here, but you truly never know. And it was always kind of a stay away. And then Pure Noise signing, House and Trance gets announced. You know, It's like, well, they don't hate each other. They're still making music. Let's reach out. Now's the time. And actually, we had the Twitter. What happened on Twitter? We had
the Twitter exchange. I think you posted the record when it came because we both bought it. We pre-ordered it. Showed up in the mail. We're super stoked it's there. We'll have it in our hands, like the first Crime Mysterio record in 13 years. You know, it's Christmas morning in late October, and they were like, "Have us on the podcast." And we think it's Alex that runs I'm pretty sure he's the one that runs a lot of their socials. And you know, we DMs back and forth, and stuff happens. Holidays happen. It takes time to some of these things from. Like we say it in the episode, from start to let's do this to actually getting it off the ground to happen to you guys hearing it today takes 5 months, 4 months sometimes because life gets in the way, things happen, holidays happen, and we were able to finally, you know, get this recorded early January and out to you now, and it's a phenomenal 2-part conversation.
I think it's a banger. I tell him in the episode, and I think I'm going to stand by it. I think it's my favorite episode, not only just the content, but how the conversation went. It was. I think we recorded, 2.5 hours?
At least. Yeah,
total?
Maybe a little more, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we probably could have kept going, but I think, you know, people at work and whatnot. But this first episode, we get into Alex's come up on Long Island. If you're a Long Island head like we are, there's some gold as far as like mid-90s to early 2000s Long Island talk. We get into the start of the band, the history of the name, which I never knew. So I don't even know if that's even known, but the history of the band. And there's 2 all-time stories about how they got signed to Blackout. I'm not going to give any hints. You'll have to listen. And about how they signed to Nitro. Those are all-time. Like I would put those up against anything on this podcast that we've had. We dig into the Troubled Stateside a little bit. We dig into the Bridge 9 era. And that's really where this episode cuts off. It's probably going to be an hour. And then part 2 is more of the ramp up to House and Trance, Pure Noise, and just some, you know, talk about the scene and whatnot. But yeah, if you like this, stick around for part 2.
Yeah, and you'll like this. So listen to this one. hit us up in the DMs, share it with your friends, wait for a week, and part 2 will hit you next week around this time as well. So yeah, let's get into part 1 with Alex Dunne of Crime and Stereo.
Alex.
Yes.
Crime and Stereo, live from New York, I assume somewhere. How the hell are you doing?
Good. How are you guys? I'm stoked. I'm stoked to finally get to do this. We've been circling it for a little bit, and I'm sorry that I've been giving you the runaround around the holidays, but I'm thrilled to have this be the first thing of the year.
That's to be expected. We get that now, having done this for almost 4 years. So stuff doesn't always start day 1 and then day 3 we're doing it. Sometimes it takes a couple of months to get things together, and we're super stoked that it's even happening. So don't even worry about that, man. So yeah, we're doing well. We're excited to have you.
Hell yeah. Let's dive in. You guys have let's see. I'm interested to see what you got.
You have no idea what's coming. So Alex, there's one person on this planet that has listened to Crime and Stereo the most out of every human being, and it's this guy. I would put it up against anyone, maybe besides someone in the band, and maybe even still, like, it's one of those things like you don't taste your own food type of thing. Like you steer clear of it, dude. It's me. It is me.
Wow, man. Thank you so much.
I don't know how to prove it, but it's fucking me.
That's fucking awesome. I mean, we really appreciate it. Like that's incredible. It's incredible, honestly, that anybody listens to our band. So it's really awesome. We're super grateful for anybody that does, everybody that does.
Do you really mean that? Like, are you surprised that people are into it?
I don't know. I think we're a good band. I think we've always been a good band, but I think part of doing this for a long time and I'm sure like you guys or whatever, like spending your life in music, just like in your scene and going to shows and being friends with bands and everything, like, I mean, you see it both ways. Like you see the, bands that are just not very good, become the biggest bands in the world. And you see the bands that are legitimately, sincerely the best bands in the world. And they never get to like make a record or go on tour or do any of this stuff. So I don't, if you have a band that kind of exists in the world in such where like you make records and people know who your band is and they buy your stuff and listen to your stuff and whatever, like you're like 1 in a million of 1 in a million. You're so lucky.
So true. That's so true.
Yeah. So like, no, like, I'm not trying to be like self-deprecating. I think we're a good band, but I think that any band that like gets to kind of do this stuff at that level you're super lucky.
It's a really good point, because it's kind of like pro sports, and we've made this analogy here and there on the podcast before, but you don't get to the NBA, you don't get to Major League Baseball. Even some of the best do, but like you've got to be good to get there. You've got to be a good band too. I mean, obviously we think you are. So, but you've got to be that. You've got to put your time in. You've got to play those basement shows for how many years. You've got to have somebody take a chance on putting you on a bill or more than that to get to the point where you're, on Pure Noise 25 years later and putting records out.
Yeah.
So,
well, it actually reminds me of, I don't know if you know that whole like thing. I think it was like a Malcolm Gladwell thing originally, but about how like sports parents try to target their kids' enrollment date. Are you familiar with this whole?
This is in
phenomenon?
Yep. It's Outliers.
So,
yes.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
It's
An Outlier.
Outliers,
So it's like, for people that if you're not familiar with this, like if you want your kid to be a good athlete and they're born later in the year, you want them held back till the following school year, because it has this compounding effect where your kid, when they start playing sports, they're basically 5 years old playing, 6 years old playing against five-year-olds, and they're physically better. And then that gives them more confidence. And then they get to go on the travel team. And when they get on the travel team, they get better coaching. And then they're playing against better competition. And so that kicks them up another level. And you go to the next level, and it's the same thing. It's better coaching, better facilities, better competition. Anyway, I bring that up to say that like being in a band is extremely similar. That when you're a band and you're lucky to start out and go on tour, that's reps. Like those are your reps. Like anybody that's ever been in a local band knows, like it's tough to get shows. Like it's when you're starting out as a local band, like it's tough to get 4 or 5 shows in a year or string together
Totally.
a half a dozen shows, let alone like, wow, how do we go out of state? Like, who do we talk to? And like, how do we get a show in a, in some other state? And anyway, when you go on tour, now you're playing 100 shows, like 200, you're playing every single night. And it has that same kind of compounding effect where like, like you're learning your chops and you're getting better, but then you get kicked up into better rooms and you're not playing VFWs and catering halls with like somebody's shitty PA that they brought from their house. Now you're in clubs that have $5 million sound systems, or maybe when you're starting out like $1 million sound systems. And I remember distinctly like when we got to the point in touring where we had monitors. We had been touring for years before we ever stepped on stages that had monitors. And that was like a whole thing to learn of like, oh, now we can hear ourselves. And then the same thing that like, then if you are very, very, very lucky as a band, you get to go and start opening up for the best bands in the world. And in some cases, like with us, like the greatest bands of all time, like we've gotten to really play with like many of the greatest punk and hardcore bands to have ever existed. And you're getting blown off the stage every night by these bands. Like it's embarrassing, like you're coming out of a VFW and you feel like pretty good about, how your stuff sounds. And then you get on these stages and it's like, these bands are machines. They never make a mistake. They never have an off night. They don't even take breaks in between songs. And anyway, I think that being in a band is very, very, very similar to that kind of, young athlete analogy that like, if you're lucky to get the reps and then you're lucky to play the good rooms and then you're lucky to open up for these bands, that's the kind of maturation process that I don't know how like a band, I don't know how you could replicate or like manufacture that without actually having the real experience.
Totally.
Well, hey, let's keep with this analogy because you coming out of Long Island is basically that 6-year-old playing against 5-year-olds. And so I know you were in the rookie lot before Crime in Stereo. Is that where it starts for you? Or does it start even before that? Because I know that was, 98, 99?
Yeah. The rookie lot was probably 98, like 97, 98. I was a junior in high school. And so, like, how about this? It feels kind of like the opposite. It doesn't feel like, oh, we're 6-year-olds playing against 5-year-olds. Like, I think in that analogy, it's like we are the 5-year-olds. Like you got to realize that like
I agree.
When I was growing up, in a 2-town radius. So my town, Levittown. I'm from Levittown, New York, which is America's first suburb. Me and Christian and all the original Crime and Stereo guys are all from Levittown. There's 3 high schools in Levittown, and then the next town over is Merrick, Belmore Merrick, and in just the 2 high schools in my town, and then the 1 town over was all of the guys from Brand New, Movie Life, and Glassjaw.
So you're the freshman trying out for the varsity team. Is basically what you're saying.
It was like and it was the same thing with Lindenhurst at the time. So like Lindenhurst was the Long Island hardcore mecca, and it is again, now, but in the mid 90s, that's where Silent Majority is from, and Mind Over Matter, and Millhouse, and all of these bands. And, VOD also is from Merrick. So it's basically between 3 high schools that are all right next to each other. I had the guys from VOD, Glassjaw, Movie Life, and Brand New in my school or in the same town.
Crazy.
And that puts you in a weird, like, it's like, and then across the rest of Long Island with the bands we came up with, Heads versus Breakers and Backup Plan and Scraps and Heart Attacks, which kind of morphed into This Is Hell and Thieves and Assassins. And like, it basically was like, if you wanted to be recognized in your own scene, you were up against the biggest bands in the world. Like in your own high school. Like if I wanted to, I couldn't even be like my band was the cool band from my high school, like with Crime and Stereo, because it's like the dudes from Brand New are from my high school, and again, like all the guys from all those other bands were from either the north side of Levittown or 1 town over in Merrick, in Belmore Merrick. So that I mean, Long Island, like, it's very chill. Everybody, it's very, there's a great like atmosphere of camaraderie. But dude, the Long Island bands, like Long Island is so sick musically. There are so many sick bands that it is this kind of like, I don't know, pressure. I don't want to say pressure cooker, but like a very like baptism by fire kind of thing. Like if you want to be recognized around here, like everybody's sick, every band is sick. And then when you factor in the bands from that like early aughts pop punk email explosion, many of them are like still the biggest bands in America and the world.
Totally. Yeah. So what drew you into it initially? Is it you like the camaraderie of the people that were in the scene, or was that you just like music, you want to play music, hang with your friends, do that?
Yeah. I was a hardcore kid first before I ever, thought that I would pick up guitar. I got into it through like the BMX scene. So this was like the early 90s when I was in like middle school. And there was a skate park in Levittown called Yam. It was like in the back alley behind like a Jewish community center. And there was this would have been like 95. I was probably in, like 8th or 9th grade.
30 years ago. Insane.
Yeah. So there was a cassette tape floating around in, I'm going to say right around then, 94, 95, which would have made me 13 or 14. And it was on one side, it was the VOD still 7-inch. And the other side was the 25 to Life short fuse 7-inch.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And just like everybody was making copies of this tape. I mean, this really was in the days where like, not to go all like back in my day, but again, if you guys are 40 years old, like it's the same era for you where it was like, someone had to hand you something physically. Like you had to be handed a tape, you had to be handed a flyer that had directions printed on it. Like there was no other way to kind of get into these things. And so now, like right now in 2023, like you hear people talking all the time about like turnstile and like the turnstile effect and like the seemingly like millions of new hardcore kids that they've brought into it. But back in like 1995, that was VOD. I mean, VOD on Long Island was just, I wish that there was a way to kind of like, I wish I had like a visual aids to show you like all of the shows back then were still illegal. This was years, and this was 10 years before major venues were willing to take a chance on hardcore music. Every show was an illegal underground show, and VOD was putting 2,000 and 3,000 people in warehouses, in illegal back alley warehouses on Long Island. So that, and I think the VOD explosion, like that was kind of their thing. And then that spills over into, Silent Majority and Glassjaw and all of these guys kind of having this very fertile, even though Silent Majority were contemporaries of VOD, it just brought in it's just what must have been a zillion people, obviously, speaking, exaggerating, but I was one of them. And I think everybody kind of in my generation from Long Island, like it was VOD that got you in, and then you had Silent Majority and Mind Over Matter and Millhouse and Inside and Indecision and Trip Face. And, this was when Glassjaw was opening shows, Movie Life was opening shows.
So you're going to shows, you're in the thick of it. You're in the rookie lot. How does that do you remember the turning point where Crime in Stereo did not exist one day and then the next day it's a thing? Like, what was that?
Yes. After rookie lot, I was the only one of my music friends, me and Mike Musili, who was the other co-founder of Crime in Stereo. He was our original bass player up through Is Dead. We were the only ones that went to college. So like all of my other high school friends, so the other dudes in rookie lot were Jesse, Brian, and Garrett from Brand New, and Brandon Riley from Movie Life. And so when we graduated high school, they all went on tour, like at 18 years old, and they all went on tour. It was like Brandon joined Movie Life just before they were about to do This Time Next Year. And the dudes, Brian did go to college for maybe like the first year or whatever, but then they started Brand New and they started touring super quick. So there's kind of a weird thing with Crime in Stereo and those bands, because the dudes in those bands are my contemporaries in age. Me and Brian,
Yeah.
me, Brian, and Garrett from Brand New, and Brandon from The Movie Life. We all graduated high school the same year, and Jesse was a couple of years older than us. Daryl and Vin were a couple, and Justin Beck and those dudes were maybe like 2 years older. And Vin Accardi, who went to my high school, the guitar player from Brand New, was 2 years younger than me. So those dudes, in terms of age, are all my contemporaries. But by the time we started Crime in Stereo, they were all in the biggest bands in America. So Crime in Stereo, we started my junior year of college, which would have been the beginning of 2002. And it really was by that time, that was Movie Life was about to put out 40 Hour Train. Brand New in 2003 would have put out Deja. Glassjaw did Worship and Tribute that year, so it's like, it's hard. It's kind of like hard to put into words. Like, we were getting off the ground and like trying to like get shows and like do a demo and stuff like that. And all of my like friends from high school were literally like on TRL every day. And, like these dudes are, it was really, kind of a crazy thing. So Crime in Stereo, how it started was similar to that Mike and I had a band in between Rookie Lot and Crime in Stereo that wasn't good and kind of was very directionless and aimless. And we broke up on New Year's Day of 2002. We broke up that day. And we said we wanted to start a hardcore band. And then randomly, what I think was like a couple of days later, this was the first week in January, Brand New was playing the Chance in Poughkeepsie, which just closed, and they were opening for Murphy's Law. And so me and Mike, who started Crime in Stereo with, we were huge Murphy's Law fans. And the show was Brand New, Taking Back Sunday, Fizzlewink, who later became Matchbook Romance, and Murphy's Law.
On Epitaph, yeah.
Yeah, at the Chance in Poughkeepsie. And we drove from Long Island to Poughkeepsie in a cargo van with no seats, where we were sitting on pallets on the floor with all of the amps and everything, just sliding around on pallets on the floor with like amps and heads and everything. And me and Mike rolled with Brand New up to the show, which they opened, because we wanted to see Murphy's Law. And Christian Hallbert, the Crime in Stereo singer, was a freshman in college. He was in art school in Manhattan for photography. And he was friends with Eddie Reyes from Taking Back Sunday. And this was like when Taking Back Sunday was on a demo. And so Christian rolled with Taking Back Sunday up to the same show in their van to take pictures for them. And so later we're all hanging out while Fizzlewink is playing. And it's just the three of us. And we have this van to ourselves. And me and Mike and Christian are sitting in this van drinking like 40 ounces or whatever. And me and Mike were like, yeah, we're going to start a new hardcore band. And Christian was like, I can sing. And like, truly, based on nothing, like we had no evidence that he could sing. It was based on nothing other than, in that moment, Christian said, I can sing. And we said, you're in.
Wow. Did you even know him at the time?
He's from Division, which is the north side of Levittown High School. So he's a couple of years younger than Brandon Riley and Garrett Tierney and some of the dudes from that side of Levittown. So we did know him. He's 2 years younger than me. But it was really that we were just, it's so surreal to think about that we were just like drinking 22s in a van at a brand new Taking Back Sunday Murphy's Law show.
Yeah.
and Christian just was like, yeah, man, like I can sing. And we were like, that's it. You're the singer.
Did you guys have any early goals once you started, jamming? We like, let's just play some shows, or like, let's try to make this as big and as, as good as it can be?
The only time we really had stated goals were our ultimate goal was to tour out to California and do one album, like get signed and be able to make one album. And those really at the time seemed like extremely lofty goals, like I was a junior in college or whatever, so that seemed crazy. Again, this was still early days. This is like before, you know, I really don't, I'm not trying to get like old man on the porch or anything, but those things felt not easily attainable. You know what I mean? Like, so many of the bands that we were obsessed with, that like were our heroes, it's like those dudes had never gotten to California. Like, they had never done a full US tour, or they had one record and broke up, and that was it. So to say, so you wanted to do a record and do like a full US tour, like those felt like big goals.
They are. I mean, we know how hard it is to break in. Those are massive goals. So nothing to sneeze at. And obviously you made them happen. So,
well, especially in that lens, you know, the 2001, 2002 lens, like it's not the tell all your friends era TBS. It's right before that. It's not Deja era. So like, you know, like Neglect never made it out there. You know what I mean? Like that wave never probably crossed the Mississippi. And it was before, like you said, like the Glass Jaws and everyone really, really, really popped. So yeah, given the context, that is pretty lofty. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, Silent Majority did one US tour their whole existence. So it was like they saw California one time. They have, you know, 2 7-inches and a full length and an EP. You know, like that really was like those were the big goals. Like I'm not trying to make it seem like what we've been able to accomplish is like pedestrian now, but to be a band that had like 5 full lengths or whatever, you know, and had done world tours, like you had to be, you know what I mean? Like in the late 90s, like early 2000s, which is where, you know, I guess at the time we're talking about, it's like 2002, 2003. It was like you had to be Hatebreed or so, you know what I mean? Somebody
totally
like, you know, Snapcase, like you had to be the biggest hardcore band in the world to ever think you were going to see that number of albums or that kind of touring.
Absolutely. Yeah, that didn't happen pre this kind of wave. And then this wave certainly made that a little more accessible. And I think that, I mean, looking at it through a 2023, 2024 lens, it's way more attainable today. But the game has changed too, right? I mean, it's part-time jobs for a lot of people.
This is before MySpace, is before like any of these kinds of things. And I remember when we first started touring in what would have been 2003. And when I say touring, I mean like getting out of state shows, you know, where you would go and try and string together like a Jersey and a Philly show or, you know, something like that. One time we drove to Atlanta to play one show. We drove from Long Island to Atlanta to play one show and back. But at that time, we had to get contacts from Kill Your Idols. So this was like, this really was this kind of like old world, you know, like samizdat being, you know, passed down from friends to friends, that like you couldn't just book a show. We happened to be, you know, friends with the guys in Kill Your Idols, and they were amazing to us in our early days. And they gave us a notebook that was like, this is this dude in Florida and this guy in Pennsylvania. And it's like, if you want to play out of state shows, like here's this guy's phone number. Like you have to call him. And that was how we started touring, was with this like book of contacts that Kill Your Idols gave us.
It was some dude's mom's house, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
We've heard that before too. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, all of the early years of Crime and Stereo touring was just VFWs. Lucky if you're in a VFW. I mean, like basements and living rooms and catering halls and sleeping on floors for years, for like several years before we ever. It was the touring on Is Dead that we ever were on like package tours with big bands in real venues. So all of the Explosives, Contract, Troubled Stateside time was just DIY touring.
So how'd the name come about? And I know some bands are protective of the name; they don't want to disclose.
No, this is like a dumb story. We had we had no PA. We used to Scotty. So the band started as myself, Christian, Mike Musili, and Scotty, our original drummer. And we practiced in Scotty's basement, and we didn't have a PA. And so we had a shitty old keyboard amp, like a Roland keyboard amp. And
Yep. Wow.
One day before practice, we knew we liked the word crime, and we were like throwing around different kind of iterations of the word crime. And Christian like took this microphone 1/4-inch cable over to this like Roland keyboard amp and was like, didn't know where. He was like, do I plug it in mono or in stereo? And we all like looked at each other and we were like, that's Crime in stereo. And that was it. And then shortly later, we had our demo recorded in that same basement, in Scotty's basement, by Vinnie Corrigan, who is Tommy Corrigan, the singer for Silent Majority. It's his younger brother, who was in Inside and Blood Red, and is like just phenomenal musician and this amazing dude. And he made our first demo in that basement on a Tascam 4-track to cassette. It's so weird to say these things because it makes me sound like I came up with like the Velvet Underground in the 70s. You know, it's like, it's so bizarre now, like, to hear myself say these things out loud, but it's like, yeah, like that was the early days of this band. Was like the first demo was on a Tascam 4-track to cassette, and to get shows, like we got like crumpled slips of paper from Kill Your Idols, you know, to get out of state contacts. And yeah.
So Alex, Crime in Stereo was almost Crime in Analog.
Yeah, Crime in Mono. Dude, I don't even want to say like the dumbass things that we were throwing around. Like, it's a blessing that I don't know if Crime in Stereo is a good name. I really don't. I don't possess the ability to tell. So like, it could be a cool name, or it could be like a super cornball cheesy name. I can't know at this point, but it is definitely better than any of the other things that it almost was.
It's amazing. And as fans, we can say, we think it's a cool name. It fits. We've dove in headfirst on a couple different episodes where we've maybe limp-basted some not so good names that we. So this one's not one of those. This is definitely a good band name.
Crime in Mono. Yeah, that
would have needed to more explain.
I'll tell you another thing about like what's surreal about like being in a band was like I now like distinctly palpably recall this kind of like low grade anxiety because Death by Stereo already existed. Yep. And it was like, like Death by Stereo, and like they're on Epitaph and they're huge, and it's like, is everyone gonna just like say that we're biting them or we're ripping them off, or like what if nobody ever notices us because of how big Death by Stereo is, and just like the dumb things that you think about.
So you guys form, you do the demo, 4-track in the basement, you pick a name. So demo drops, which I've been trying to get that demo forever. No one has it for sale. I'm not even convinced it exists.
Oh, if I ever come across one, I will get it to you. I'm not sure that I have one.
Oh, right on. Okay, so I don't feel as bad. And then there's the Kill Your Idol split. Then there's Explosives, Contract era. And that was the era that I got into, guys. It was,
nice.
Honestly, like I looked up, Explosives came out 20 years ago, almost to the day.
When is this podcast going to air?
This is going to air
probably late January.
Mid to late Jan.
Okay. So fine. So this won't matter then. Thursday of this week, January 4th, which will actually be the 20-year anniversary of when Explosives came out.
The 6th, right?
Explosives will be available on vinyl for the first time ever.
Oh wow. That's awesome.
Blackout is putting that out. It was never pressed to vinyl the first time around. So this is the first time it'll ever be out. So I guess by the time people are hearing this, you will be able to buy that.
So we're going to rush to get this out tonight. And we're going to break the internet. We're breaking.
No, we're not. As the main editor, we are not doing that.
So the reason I bring that up is the goal was West Coast appearance and one full length. So at this point in like 2004, you do that. Is there a reassessment of the plan?
I'm trying to think of like the chronology in which all of these things happened. I mean, look, at a point when you're like, once you're on the road, there is something so addictive about it that I think that's the only thing that you can see. You are truly living the dream. Like when you're like, again, like Crime in Stereo started with 4 dudes who were friends from their hometown, none of whom could play instruments. Like it was like, you're going to play bass and you'll sing I'll be the guitar player. Like no one knew how to play instruments or anything. And so like to get to the point where like you have a record deal and, people are singing along at shows and you're touring the country with your best friends. It's so intoxicating that I'm going to say, that probably was like 2005 for us, 2004, 2005. And that's really all the mentality was until we broke up. That really is essentially what led us to break up. And I think this, I'm speculating, but I would imagine this is the downfall of many bands, is you just start making all of your decisions based on how do we stay on the road? Because first of all, again, the lifestyle of being in a full-time touring band, there is no better life you could live. It's like you've made it. Even if you're not getting the money and the sold out shows and all of those kind of more material trappings, to just like be on the road with your best friends, playing shows every single night, being in a different city. At that age, 22 years old. It's the best life you can live. But then what happens is, if you come off tour for too long, then you have to get jobs. It's like you only have enough money to like live at home for like 2 weeks or whatever, or maybe you can pick up like pizza delivery gigs or something like that. But it's like, hey, if we stay home for 2 months, then I have to get a job. And then if everybody gets jobs, you're not sure if everybody's going to be able to leave again for the next tour, because now maybe you have to stay so you don't lose your job. So it eventually, and I'm fast forwarding here, this is years later, but I do feel like that when you say like were goals reassessed, no, I don't think we ever were like, here's what the next goal is. It literally just became, how do we stay on the road full time so that we don't have to go home and get shitty jobs in pizza places? And that's why like Crime and Stereo's done some like strange tours, like strange bedfellows. Like we went on tour with anybody. There was we did an Against All Authority Crime and Stereo tour.
The 10 for 10 tour. How's that one?
Yeah, that was, I mean, that was different. That was better. That was later, and that was much cooler. But like in the early days, man, it was like, yeah, if you're gigging, we're gigging. You know, like we're down to play shows because we don't want to be home.
How does Nitro come into the picture? I know. So in terms of time frame, we're talking 06. The signing must have probably been in 05. So Explosives maybe popping a little bit.
Yeah, Explosives did okay. So Explosives comes out on Blackout. We do the contract to get out of the Blackout. That's why it's called the contract. There's an interesting. So wait, let me back up. I hope I'm not getting too.
No, dig into the weeds here.
To your listeners. I don't want to skip over an interesting and funny story. We got our first record deal because we gave a free bag of weed to John Joseph from the Cro-Mags.
No way.
That is actually what happened. There was a booking agent on Long Island, this dude Christian McKnight, who's like a huge, everybody in New York knows him. He's a big dude. He's been booking shows for forever. And he, at the time, was the dude who booked shows on Long Island. He knew that we were big Cro-Mags fans, and Cro-Mags were playing on Long Island on a Friday night. And he asked us if we wanted to open the show, and we said, of course. And at the show, Cro-Mags is on stage, and John Joseph says, hey, I don't smoke. He's straight edge, but my nephew and like our roadie are looking for weed. If anybody knows where we can find some weed, like come hit me up after the show. And I knew somebody that was at the show that sold weed, and I was like, hey, give me a bag. Let me give it to these dudes. And I go up to John Joseph and I give him this bag of weed. And he was like, how much do you want for this? And I was like, no, it's cool. I got it. It's for you guys. Got it from a friend. And he goes, that's amazing. You were in the opening band, right? And I go, yes. And he goes, hold on a second. Wait right here. And he goes off and he talks to somebody, and he comes back and says, we're doing a Sunday matinee this Sunday. So this was Friday night. He's like, on Sunday, we're doing a Sunday matinee at CBGB's. And this was, again, you got to realize, like, Cro-Mags, Sunday matinee, CBGB's, to a hardcore kid, lifelong hardcore kid. This is, you couldn't believe it. And he just says, he's like, the opening band on that show dropped off. Why don't you guys come open the show on Sunday? And
Crazy.
So we go, played the show. I think it was like Hope Conspiracy and Ensign, like all these sick bands. And at that show is where the guys from Blackout Records saw us and said they wanted to sign us. And so that was only like, again, I'm going to say the Cro-Mag show, the first one was like our 7th show. And then CB's show was maybe like our 8th show ever. And we got signed at that, which really came down to giving John Joseph free weed, a guy who doesn't even smoke weed.
Well, I mean, that goes back to our initial kind of conversation about being freshman playing with the varsity. Yeah. You'd cut your teeth around a lot of really amazing musicians, so it was in the, it was in the mix for you guys from the start, and it's 7-8 shows in, you're having people asking you to sign.
That's so fucking amazing.
It was cool. I mean, we all have like great memories of this, that like at that CB's show, John Joseph, before we went on, because we were opening, like took Christian aside, and Christian was just this like super beanpole skinny, like gawky kid, super nervous, and John Joseph was just amping him up and hyping him up, and it was super cool. So the question about Nitro. So here is another interesting story. For whatever reason, we fell out with Blackout, and genuinely, I don't remember the specifics of it. We were, I believe, just not happy with whatever they were doing, but I don't recall the specifics. But it also like wasn't like terrible. It was semi-amicable, and I believe he had a option for a second album, and we said, how about we give you an EP and you let us out? And he said okay. And that's why we put out the Contract EP. That's why it's called The Contract. And then we couldn't find anyone to sign us, and it seemed like nobody was interested. And so, again, I remember this so distinctly. We were working at Merch Direct at the time, which was this T-shirt company that Justin from Glassjaw started. And the early days of Merch Direct was just all the dudes from Kill Your Idols, the dudes from Silent Majority, all me, Christian, and Mike from Crime and Stereo. Just a bunch of like legendary Long Island dudes, Hugo Fitzgerald and Brian Meehan from Kill Your Idols. All these people were there. And we were sitting there kind of just talking about how much it sucked that nobody wanted to sign us. And we were talking to Jay Reason, who was this East Coast hardcore dude. There's another legendary dude. And he used to run Jamie Josta's label, Stillborn. And we were friends with him. We used to play with The Distance all the time. Shout out Jay Reason, awesome dude. And he was like, hey, man, like, I love your band. We all love your band. Like, we'd love to sign you to Stillborn. And he was like, it's probably not. And at the time, this was like Sworn Enemy, was like huge on that. And, it was like, it's probably not what people think of when they think of Crime and Stereo. But like, if nobody wants to sign you, we'd love to have you guys on Stillborn. And we literally were about to send the email to be like, we'd love to sign to Stillborn. Let's do this. And an email came in from Nitro saying, hey, we'd love to sign your band. Can you please give us a call? Blah, blah, true cold call email. And I like, we will never forget it, that we were sitting at the computer, basically about to sign to Jamie from Hatebreed's label, and Nitro emailed us. The flip side to that story is even better. What had happened was Dexter Holland, the singer from The Offspring, his best friend is this guy, Jason, an amazing dude. He is the guy whose voice is saying, gotta keep them separated.
Oh, nice.
Come out and play. So that guy, the guy whose voice you hear in that song, is Dexter Holland's lifelong best friend, who he's on Smash, he's on Ixnay on the Hombre. He's got like platinum records all over his house, and he was the Offspring's roadie and guitar tech in their earliest days. By the time this happened, he had moved to Seattle, was living in Seattle with his wife and kids. And Dexter, if you don't know this, like, he's a pilot. He flies planes himself and also owns several of his own planes. So he just like flies around doing what he wants to do. So he randomly had flown up to Seattle and went out for a beer with Jason and was just lamenting that like he felt like nothing cool was happening at Nitro because AFI had just left. So there was like, you had the big, huge AFI years, and that was also like Guttermouth and, Jughead's Revenge and Vandals, and they had all this big stuff, and it's almost like all of that stuff petered out at the same time. And he was commiserating with his best friend saying, this sucks. I have no bands to sign. And this dude goes, you have to listen to this record. And he takes Dexter Holland to his car and plays him Explosives. And Dexter gets back in his plane, flies back to LA, goes into Nitro the next day and tells his A&R guy, sign this band. The dude emails us in that moment. That's when we get the email. So we don't sign to Stillborn. And then like a week later, he flew out to New York to see us at a Kill Your Idol show. And then we signed with them, and they were amazing. Sean Zebarth is the dude who signed us. He signed No Trigger, Wilhelm Scream. That's how that roster of Nitro all happened kind of in that moment, because Dexter was trying to like replenish the roster. They had this dude, Sean, the A&R guy there, who was like the most amazing dude ever. And he signed us, No Trigger, Wilhelm Scream,
Right on.
the Swellers. It was awesome. And like, and again, that whole period of our lives is just like such an amazing memory. Offspring used to lend us their studio, like their recording studio, to go in and practice. They would. It's so silly to think about now, because in my memory, me in my memory look like I'm 12 years old, but it's like at the time I was actually like 24. But they used to give us full run of their warehouse, Offspring's warehouse. You have never seen an amount of gear like this in your life. I'm not kidding. It's a 20,000 square foot warehouse with road cases stacked to the ceiling. They easily could put on their own arena show by themselves. Like they could show up at Madison Square Garden and do all of the sound with their gear. And they used to just let us climb like mountains of gear like we were like children, and we would just be like opening road cases and be like, oh, like Marshall 800 head, and like pulling out like Les Pauls, and these guys, they would be like, oh, we haven't seen that in 10 years. And it was awesome. It was a really really rad time. And strangely, what happened then is Dexter started a hot sauce company, and then decided that he wanted to pour all of his energy into his hot sauce company, and basically kind of like turn Nitro into a catalog label, and then had this hot sauce company called Gringo Bandito. That was good. It was very good.
Yeah. We've talked about that in the pod before too. So were you guys, while you're kind of waiting to be signed by whoever at this point, are you writing the Troubled Stateside? Is it together, or you have ideas for it?
I would say that every Crime and Stereo record, up until obviously the new one, like had songs that were from the session of the previous record. And so like Nixon on Is Dead was a Troubled Stateside song. It was like a song that we had demoed musically. There weren't vocals written, but we had all the music written on, for Troubled Stateside. Interestingly, you can hear it on the record. That's the only song on Is Dead that's in a different tuning. So that whole album is tuned to E flat, and Nixon is the only song on the record that's in E standard. That's why it sounds so much brighter when you like hit that point in the record, because Troubled Stateside was written and recorded in E standard, and that was from those sessions. Anyway, were we writing? We were always writing. More than anything, that was really what we loved to do. I'd still to this day, like we love making music more than anything. So we were always at practice, we were always in the basement jamming. I mean, like, honestly, at that period, if we were home, it was 5 days a week. We were playing every day. We were always writing. And Troubled Stateside, most of it. So Troubled Stateside's a weird record. It's a weird chronology, because Troubled Stateside comes out in 2006 and Is Dead comes out in 2007, only a year apart, but they were recorded 2 years apart. So Troubled Stateside was actually recorded spring of 2005. And then we went on tour again, went to Europe, came back in the fall of 2005 and mixed it. And we handed it in at basically the end of the year 2005. And so by the time it came out, it was spring 2006. And it really was a year after it had been recorded.
That's crazy.
But I remember also on that Everything Changes and Bicycles for Afghanistan were the last two songs written. Those songs weren't. So when we did the Fuel Transit Sleep EP, which was like this kind of like preview 3-song EP, when we did that, we thought that other song, When the Women Come Out to Dance, we thought that was going on the album. And we thought the record was done. And then we did this European tour, and on that tour wrote Everything Changes and Bicycles for Afghanistan, and came home, and in those mixing sessions also recorded both of those songs. So those were the last two done, basically, like right before we handed it in.
That's ironic, because they're the first two songs on the album. You answered a question I've had for probably, 17, 18 years, which is, I used to go on the Bridge 9 board a lot. I know, whatever, it hasn't aged well, but there was an article posted, an interview posted from Dexter Holland many years ago. And he basically said, he was asked about like, hey, are there any upcoming bands that, you're interested in? And he was quoted saying, hey, there's this band Crime and Stereo I want to work with. And here's the irony. The album was already out. So like, it had to have been a brilliant Dexter PhD moment where he's like, I'm going to direct people to an album we already put out.
Look.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
do you remember
I do.
this? Okay.
Look, here's the thing. I'm trying to like, this is no shade literally whatsoever. Like, that dude fucking rules. Offspring rules. I love them as a band still to this day. And he was nothing but amazing to us. But is it possible that the record had completely come out already and that he was not aware and thought that this was still like an upcoming thing? Like, yes, you have to understand. Yep. I don't, until I was up close to him, you don't realize how big the Offspring is or how many records they have sold. And to put it in context for you, prior to this whatever this most recent Blink-182 did, at this time, at the time at which we were talking, so this is after the Blink major label, like I Miss You record, like the Sirius record. This was already after that. Offspring had sold 2.5 times more records than Blink-182.
I believe it. Yep.
Insane.
So Blink, I think, had 20 million records sold at the time, and Offspring had 50. Dexter's next door neighbor was Billy Bob Thornton. Like, there was a time when we were on Nitro where he was going to sign Billy Bob's band. They were called like the Boxcars or something like that. And he was going to put out their record just because like that was his bro. He owned 3 planes. When the first time we met him, he left that meeting to go fly to Russia because he was buying a Russian MiG fighter jet. And he was like, I'm going to Russia. I got a decommissioned fighter jet. They took the weapons off of it. And it's like the Russian enemy plane from Top Gun. And I'm flying to Russia. And then I'm going to fly that back. And that was like his 3rd or 4th plane at that time. Anyway, I say all of this to say that this is like Alanis Morissette level shit, like fame and money. Totally. And, like, it's this kind of thing where it's like the street, it's like Will Smith lives on your block and things like that. Like, and I don't mean this pejoratively, just as like a blanket statement of fact. You can't live on planet Earth. You can't be in Beverly Hills and on the radio and TV every day and have 50 million records sold and have checks for just millions and millions of dollars showing up just whenever they show up. And then also, I don't know, have like day-to-day oversight of like your vanity.
Your empire.
Right? Label, yes. Yeah. And then also, you also have to remember too that like, remember what a lightning bolt AFI was for Nitro. Like they were the best and biggest punk hardcore band on the planet for years and years and years. And so they also sold millions of records for Nitro, like before they got to Sing the Sorrow. Like their record sales were over 1 million on Nitro. All of their albums were in the hundreds of thousands sold. So, again, could I believe it that Dexter didn't know the day-to-day of Crime in Stereo? Yes. I also have another very funny quick Dexter story, which is also the first time that we met him. He brings us into his office. We're at the warehouse. He's like, come in, hang out. And one of the first questions he asks us, and he's like, how's tour? And we're like, we love it. We fucking love it. It's the best. It's the greatest. And he's like, that'll change. And I remember at the time, like in the moment, being like, oh, that was kind of a dick thing to say. Like we're so enthusiastic and we were like so exuberant. And then he was just kind of like, it seemed like kind of like a wet blanket thing. I was like, why say that? But then, at the time he was in his mid 40s and it's like he was 1,000,000,000,000% right. You know what I mean? Like a dude that spent a lifetime on tour was like, all right, guys who are on their first year of touring ever, Right.
At some point, the floor is not going to be as appetizing. And the van,
exactly. But he was awesome. Nitro was awesome. Everybody there was incredible. Like to think back about like how they treated us and everything. Like we were just like random ass kids from New York. And then like when we would go out there, they would, again, like Offspring would give us their studio to sleep at and to rehearse in and give us full run of the warehouse. And we would get stacks of like AFI vinyl with every variant. And we would be walking out of there with just thousands and thousands of dollars in merch every single time we went. And they were like, like couldn't have been happier about it. We've been very lucky with the labels that we've been on. Bridge 9 was amazing. Pure Noise Now, it like truly blows my mind. They're unbelievable and spectacular and incredible. And we just, Run for Cover, who we worked with, and Blackout, and we've just been super, super, super lucky. We've been on all the best labels, and it's been really, really awesome.
You guys have nailed it with the labels. We'll keep this moving a little bit here. Troubled Stateside, I'll say this, it could be my favorite record of all time. So I graduated college in 2007. So when this drops, I'm 20. Those lyrics, and I believe were you the predominant lyricist of that album?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like that speaks to a 20, 21-year-old, someone coming out of college. Like, it's amazing. And Tony and I have talked about it. Like, there's some bands that you grow up with that you happen to be the same age and grow with them and mature with them. And that record hit me in a time that was like, holy shit. So beyond the songs, beyond the melodies, the lyrics hit me brilliantly. And to have that backstory in Nitro, like, I love the record even more, Alex. Holy shit. I didn't think it was possible.
Yeah, listen, I'll tell you some quick recollections that I have of that record, like, and of that time. We were very, very anxious at the time because it didn't sound like anything else. I'm not trying to like gas myself up here or anything, but it just like, I'm not saying that like, oh, it was so amazing that nothing else sounded like it, but it just really sounded different. It didn't sound like, at the time, we basically toured exclusively with all of the big East Coast straight edge hardcore bands. Like every tour was like us and Have Heart and Blacklisted and Verse and Guns Up and, Down to Nothing.
Cambridge Alex, baby.
So it didn't sound like anything like that. But then even the other bands that we kind of like were aiming for, like Lifetime, it didn't sound like that. And we handed it in. I felt like there's another thing I remember distinctly. We handed it in at the same time as No Trigger handed in Canyoneer.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And so Nitro, like, it was like, like we were all bros. We used to play with them, and they gave us Canyoneer, and we were like, oh fuck. Like there was like a moment where I think we all were like, did we fuck up? Like, because it was like Canyoneer was like, I felt like, oh, this is what it's supposed to sound like. Like this is what a melodic hardcore punk band and record is supposed to sound like. And it was just like, they just that record is so perfect, and they had just nailed it. And at the same time, Set Your Goals were our those were kind of our day ones. We love those dudes. Sure. When I talked about our first goal ever being to tour out to California, our first ever California show was the first ever Set Your Goals show.
Oh, wow.
So they opened that show. That was their first show ever, was our first Cali show. So those were our dudes, and they had just done Mutiny right around the time. And I just do remember kind of feeling like, oh shit, like, is anybody going to know what to make of this or what? Because it didn't sound like anything. And it's incredibly comical to us now in the band for the number of people that reference that as like our halcyon hardcore days, like our salad days, but they make it sound like, like we were a traditional hardcore band at any point. And I don't think that we were. We always have been a hardcore band, but we never did really like very traditional hardcore. And now retroactively, when people are trying to, I think maybe say like how we've gone afield, they reference that record. Like, I wish they, still did this, like these hardcore, this sound. But to be in the band at the time, everyone of the hardcore scene, everybody was like, what the fuck is this? It's not like we put that out and people were like, yes, this traditional hardcore record that slots in perfectly with what everyone else is doing. Like, at the time, people were like, no, this is too far afield and it's too left of center and it's not real hard. Like, that's the story of us as a band, is people being like, this isn't, I guess people can't see the air quotes that I'm doing on a podcast, but like people saying like, oh, we're not a real hardcore band or whatever, or something.
But you got a lot of cosigns. Like COA was a big fan. Like behind the Crime and Serial banner is the COA Snitch record release. Poster. Yeah, you guys are on it.
That one's the best.
Yeah, you guys were on that show at Romans. So like, you lived in both worlds.
Yeah, like the Death Before Dishonor dudes, like loved us. Like a lot, all those bands, like they're all our bros, and we love all of those bands, and the bands themselves were always very supportive of us. But you know, it wasn't across the board. You know, there's always, it's never going to change.
For
There's
sure.
always like a very traditionalist element in hardcore of people saying, you know, what is and isn't, and what does and doesn't count. What always was a thing that we like hung our hats on was that when we got to become friends with Silent, we'd always known the Silent Majority guys, and then later on became friends with the guys in Lifetime. We got to play. They asked us to play their record release for the 2007 like self-titled record, and both the dudes in Silent Majority and Lifetime separately told us, they were like, you guys are having the experience we had, that like we were hardcore kids who only ever knew to play hardcore shows with hardcore bands, but you only ever kind of really got a 50% acceptance rate in the room, you know, of that there were always people being like, what is this? Why do I have to sit through this before I can see the heavy bands that I came to see? So to have our favorite bands, you know, say that we had a similar experience to them was amazing.
Well, and I feel like you probably got more of that when signing with Bridge 9. I know we talked to Chris Wren last spring, and we got kind of his side of you guys signing with Bridge 9 and putting out Is Dead. And I would imagine it kind of continued with that, because that was a little more of a change from what you were doing with Troubled Stateside.
Yeah, Chris Wren is amazing. He's the best. Like Bridge 9 was spectacular. We were signed by Carl Hensel, who was in the band Holding On, and then he went and ran Kings Road merch at Epitaph for a while. He's like the best. All these guys are just like such incredible people. I believe, I would have to check with Chris Wren. I don't know if this is still the case, but I do know that for a while we were the most prolific band on Bridge 9, that we had more releases on the label than any other band ever. I would be interested to know if that's still true. They're amazing. They were nothing but supportive, and honestly, they were so much more magnanimous and supportive than they could have been. Meaning, like at the time,
Totally.
I remember feeling that like man, did we rug pull these guys a little bit? Like that they signed us off the Troubled Stateside, which does slot into, you know, a hardcore label, and especially at the time, Bridge 9 was doing, they had, you know, signing Polar Bear Club and Strike Anywhere, and they were doing like the Newfound Glory thing, and so there's a clear through line of like, oh, Troubled Stateside, the next Troubled Stateside would be perfect for what we're doing here. And then when we handed in Is Dead, I mean, they didn't blink. Like they weren't like, what is this or whatever. They, you know, like they were totally 1,000% behind it from day one. And I do remember at the time feeling like, oh shit, like did we rug pull these guys? Like was that not fair to them? But that was in my head, and they were amazing.
Yeah, because we, like Tony said, we had Chris on, and the premise of the episode was we hit him with 5 records from Bridge 9 that we love. We didn't even tell him what they were, and he just talked about the signing and talked about the album. And he said that he didn't put any pressure and had any influence. He let you guys cook, and Is Dead came out. And it's funny, like as a band, I'm putting myself in your shoes, I would probably think the same thing. You know, like, did we rug pull these guys? Yeah. Because it was so different, but it was so good. Like at the end of the day, if the product's good, like, and I mean, the proof is in the pudding. It's like you said, one of the better selling Bridge 9 records.
I mean, to speak to how amazing Chris was, there's a whole story behind the cover for I was trying to describe you to someone, and why that cover is so strange.
I want to hear it, because that's a question we have. You're segueing into our playbook.
Here's the thing. I'm not going to tell that story, and the reason is it's not. There's no way to tell the story without it making seem like maybe, you know, I don't know. I don't want to.
Don't tell it. Leave the.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell that story, other than to say that's not the cover that it was supposed to be. That's not what it was supposed to be. And there is a story behind why and how that happened. But all of that to say that when we were like, all right, like this is the cover, Chris like looked at it, and you could read his in his mind, like his brain going like, what the fuck am I looking at? What is this? What are you doing?
Because that was my reaction as a super fan.
Yes, of course. Listen, that's the appropriate reaction.
Okay.
And I remember like you could so clearly read what was going on behind his eyes, and it was just like, this is what it is, and like, yup, and it's like, and this is what you guys want, like, yup, and he's like, okay, and not even like a dick, not even like, okay, just like truly, totally magnanimous, just like, okay, cool, like if this is the cover you want, and I look back on that, and it's like he would have been so well within his bounds to say, hey, listen, whatever is happening here artistically, this is a commercial product that we have to sell, and I am financing this product with my own cash, and like this cover is going to make it difficult for us to sell this record. Like, he would have been totally fine to say, like, can we do something here, because this is my money and you guys are making it very difficult for me to recoup this money. And it was none of that. He was just like, all right, if this is the cover and this is what you want, like, that's it. And literally never brought it up again, never said anything about it again. Was just like, thinking back on it, it's like magnanimous to a degree that is like really remarkable, because I think most people probably that would have been the minute that they were like, all right, let's talk about this.
All right, so how close were you to using your face for the cover versus Christian's?
Never. Never. The short answer of it, the easiest, simplest explanation I can give for this cover is there was a specific, you can Google this, people can Google this, the Japanese variant cover of the Philip K. Dick novel, Do Sleeping Androids Dream Electric Sheep. There was a different cover for every country that was printed in. All of his books had different covers in every country. And the Japanese cover specifically, I wanted to steal. And there was no way of us at the time figuring out who to talk to and how to get these rights and what the licensing would be. And at the same time, it wasn't worth it to risk just doing it and hoping that we didn't get sued, because then if we did, all these records had to be recalled and it would have been a whole thing. So this was, from the outset, there was an attempt at recreating that cover. That Christian was going to be the guy. There was like a cartoon, an illustration of a guy on a cover, and we were going to make Christian the guy on the cover, and then we were going to recreate this cover. And the very short version of it is, and then there was no more money. There was not enough money for this level and amount and degree of illustration to take place. And I believe, if I remember, my memory is sketchy, but like, if I believe it, we really were at a point where it was like, there was not a dime more to spend on this album, and the album had to be handed in. And it was like, we were out of time and we were out of money. The band truly, honestly, was basically on the verge of breaking up. Like, we were totally frayed. We broke up very shortly after that record was released. And everybody was just like, all right, that's what it is. Fuck it. Like, here.
Wow. It's crazy.
All right, that is the end of part 1 of our conversation with Alex Dunne of Crime and Stereo. Stay tuned. Next week, part 2 is coming at you. We're really excited for you to check that part out, too. Thanks. Thank you for listening to Podioslave. We are at Podioslave on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all of the places that you can find us on social media. Facebook, Podioslave Podcast. YouTube, Podioslave Podcast there. Email us at podioslavepodcast@gmail.com. And hey, if you want to become a supporter, click on the link at the bottom of the episode and give us $1, give us $5. It keeps the lights on, keeps us going. We really appreciate that stuff. Thank you.